Well, Americans are casting their ballots in the U.S. presidential election as the two main candidates are running neck and neck. Polling stations opened at 6 a.m. local time in states including Virginia, North Carolina, and New York. Tens of millions of voters are expected to cast their ballots. More than 82 million people have already voted early in the preceding weeks. A final outcome may not be known for several days if the results are as close as the polls suggest, adding to the tension in a deeply divided nation. The two candidates wrapped up their campaigns on Monday night as they focus on the swing states to sway undecided voters. Well, let's cross over to the United States, joined by PRESSTV's Ramin Mazaheri in Washington, D.C. Ramin, good to see you. Well, tell us about the overall environment. I mean, we saw so much chaos in 2020 and compared to 2024. I mean, what's the overall expectations and what have you seen so far as the environment in general?
How you doing, Marzier? Mr. DeBar, good to see you. I think we should start by reminding that the U.S. has had 3 disputed elections out of the last 6. And as you can see behind my left shoulder there, this is the Capitol building. Oh, there we go, left shoulder. This is the site of the January 6th rebellion or the January 6th riot. I think we should remember that in December 2020, polls showed that 40% of the entire country wanted the election to be litigated. They wanted to take it to the courts. It was such a highly disputed election, but that's so very common here in the United States since the year 2000, and it's very likely that this will be the 4th disputed election out of 7. How can we define this election in one word? In 2016, that word was denial, and Trump won. In 2020, that word was hysteria. And here in 2024, I think we can use either resignation or unwillingness. There is a real grim attitude among Democrats. There is conversely a lot of confidence among Republicans. And the reason for that is that Donald Trump is actually in his best poll position in any of his 3 elections. If we look at the polling agencies' miss in 2016 and 2020, it's been 4 or 5 points. There's a real problem with Western polling agencies, specifically with gauging the so-called shy right-wing voters, the so-called shy Trump voter. If that 4 or 5 point miss holds, Trump is going to win by 4 or 5 points because it is an absolute a dead heat. But let's go back to 2020. I think we all remember that was a crazy year, but I think it's easy to forget just how crazy it was in the United States. You had the George Floyd rebellion starting in May. And then you had, but then even in September, you regularly had huge protests in the top 20 cities in the United States to oust Trump. There has been nothing like that going on this year. The U.S. has been politically apathetic. That's sort of that's the culture here. 2020 was really very unusual. And Democrats took to the streets in 2020 to oust the incumbent. This time they want to keep the incumbent in. So it's really been, as far as street protests, it's really been quite calm. Now, 2024 has not gone swimmingly. You had 2 assassination attempts on Trump. Trump was almost killed by 1 centimeter of a bullet. Went through his ear. You had the Democratic candidate step down, well, really rather forced out by the United States oligarchs in backroom dealings. And Kamala Harris was really only campaigning for August and September and October. And this really mirrors, if you remember back in 2020, just to remind us how crazy it was, Joe Biden stayed sequestered for months because of coronavirus fears. So there's really many similarities. There was also sort of mass hysteria. It's funny to remember the claims of foreign influence. Remember when they said that Iranians were posing as members of the Proud Boys to allegedly threaten Democrats in Alaska and Florida into changing their party affiliation? There was, of course, so much anti-Russia hysteria. These things. So 2024 it's not anywhere as wild as it was in 2020. Okay. However, given what I said about the polling agencies, it might explode after the vote.
Right. What about, Ramin, the Muslim votes in the United States. Of course, this has been a very tough year for the Muslims, and watching the genocide play out, and basically incoming the President Biden not really doing anything about it to stop the Israeli regime. Do you see, one, that playing a role in this election, and two, how big of a role do you think Muslims will be playing in this vote?
Well, that's a very good question. Let's make it clear that the Democratic Party has ignored the second largest protest movement since the 1960s, since Vietnam. If we take out the George Floyd rebellion, the pro-Gaza protests, the way that they have been sustained, their intensity, that's the biggest protest movement since trying to get out of the Vietnam War. I crunched the numbers. We had back in 2020, we had 3 states decided by 21,000 votes or less. I looked at those states. They averaged 98,000 Muslim citizens in each of those states. Let's say 50,000 of them are voters. It is no exaggeration to say that the Muslim vote alone could push the election towards Donald Trump. Here's something else that is quite historic in the U.S. context. Polls show that the Green Party candidate is virtually tied with Kamala Harris in terms of voter intentions. She's leading in 3 states, Jill Stein, the Green Party. So the Muslims could actually decide this election all on their own.
All right. Let me cross over to New York. Don DeBar, activist and commentator. Don, good to see you. Tell me your overall perspective about this election. Is this, because many are saying it is the most important election in the United States ever, it's going to determine the future of the country. How do you see it, Don?
Hi, Marcy, and hi, Robin. Every election is, of course, going to determine the future to the extent that who sits in the Oval Office has any real impact on events. And over the history of the country, that's been a variable. In some cases, the president has been very hands-on, and in other cases, you've had him in a vegetative state like Joe Biden for the past couple of years, and you wonder who's really making policy, conducting wars, and things like that. I think the assessment of the situation here is correct, and in fact, I'd amplify it. We've had contested elections, for example, in 2000, Democrats, and 2004 felt that the election was stolen, and that there's no integrity in the vote counting system, and they felt that way again in 2016. Republicans feel that way certainly after 2020, and they've had that stoked. That's been a part of Trump's campaign, and so in essence, you have, since between the two of them, there's half and half of the electorate. Almost the entire electorate has really no confidence in the legitimacy of the vote count. We're going into that with both sides being told that this is the most important election ever, in a background of Trump being, painted as a Hitler and Harris being painted as, I don't know, a Mrs. Stalin or whatever. They refer to her as a communist. The people at both sides are being excited to death by the media and scared to death by the media. There's some very scary things going on in the world that are not part of the campaign at all, although Trump makes some reference to it. But the fact that we're at war with Russia at the moment doesn't really seem to matter much, particularly to Kamala Harris's campaign, even though she's part of the administration that's been doing it. There's a very real possibility that no matter who wins the election, the vote count, or whoever's declared the winner, is going to be rejected by the other half. What was essentially a semi-violent protest in 2020, the occupation of the Capitol building for a couple of hours, was painted as a wild-eyed insurrection, and people were arrested all over the country. This is now part of the imagery in the minds of people who are going to be reacting. And we had also violence, of course, in the Black Lives Matter response to the killing of George Floyd and others. So no one has taken any steps to tamp that kind of anger and tendency towards chaos in any event down. It's been excited a great deal, and in a place where, when you take a philosophy course or an ethics course, one of the questions that people are presented with was, well, if you could go back in time knowing what you know, and you saw Hitler, would you kill him? There's a movie, Dead Zone, for example, where they have that. These are people that now are presented with, half of them think they're looking at Hitler when they look at Donald Trump. And so what do you do if they steal the election for Hitler? Well, you go in the streets and you fight. And what do you do if they steal the election for Stalin? Well, you go in the streets and fight. This is the most important election in the history of the universe, etc. The stage is being set for civil war. That's my point. And it's going to take some very cool heads and someone with sort of universal sense of legitimacy, I don't know who that would be, to present the case against civil war.
Right. Well, Don, I guess going back to the question that I asked, being that how important is this election? Many say, when they say determining the direction, especially because of what you've just said, and that great divide that is taking place in the country, it's a matter of how the parties or the individuals are going to react. Because I was reading in a poll, I think it was almost 50% of the voters overall were saying that if the opposite candidate, the one who they are not supporting, actually wins, they will kind of question the integrity of the vote. That is not setting up a very positive and stable situation. So your overall assessment, do you really think that there could be violence after the election?
Yeah, I think that there's going to be some. I don't know how widespread it'll be, and I don't know what the official response will be, too. In some ways, I think perhaps it's even being induced, by certain, elements here, in the same way that I think that the occupation of the Capitol was induced by security forces in the 2020 election. That said, the CIA and whoever else of the alphabet agencies of the U.S. government have been going around the world doing this, wherever they can. They incite violence and they hope to, achieve regime change in places by doing it. And they have done that, as a matter of fact, in many places, for example, Ukraine. One of the things about it, however, is that sometimes it's very difficult to put the genie back in the bottle.
Yeah.
And so on top of that, it's just in terms of your specific question about how important the election is. The state of Utah used to have two forms of execution. You could be hanged or you could be shot by a firing squad. Which one do you want? It's not a very good choice. But we have two candidates with very distinct positions on the war with Russia, which could end up, annihilating humanity. And on that, this assumes, of course, that Trump will do what he says, which is a very risky proposition in the United States for any politician.
Indeed.
But there is a choice.
Thanks so much. So sorry, I'm out of time, but I appreciate you being with me. Don DeBar, activist and commentator out of New York, and also Ramin Mazaheri, Press TV's correspondent on the ground there in Washington, D.C. And thank you, viewers, for staying with us on another news bulletin right here at Press TV.